One of those buildings with the coin laundry in the basement, my sister said, for the poor in general. To understand why everyone laughed, and why 30 seconds later they stopped, you have to understand what Karissa thought she knew about success, and what I'd let her believe for 23 years. My name is Elsie Beckwith, and I've worked for the Central Intelligence Agency for 2 decades. My official title is Deputy Director for Operations, which means I oversee clandestine operations across 3 continents. My unofficial title is the person who gets called when an embassy needs evacuating, an asset needs extraction, or a senator needs briefing on why we can't just send in the troops. My family thinks I'm a low-level government clerk who can't afford to buy a home. The deception started accidentally and became operational necessity. When I joined the agency at 25, fresh out of Georgetown with a master's in international relations, I couldn't tell my family what I actually did. I work for the government was vague enough to be true and boring enough to discourage follow-up questions. My sister Karissa, 3 years younger, had just gotten engaged to Bradley Whitten, whose family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the mid-Atlantic. She was planning a wedding that cost more than my annual salary, or what she thought was my annual salary. At family dinners, she'd pat my hand sympathetically and say things like, "Government work is so noble, even if it doesn't pay well." I never corrected her. By the time I made GS-15 at 32, younger than anyone in my directorate's history, the fiction had calcified into family lore. Elsie, the struggling bureaucrat. Elsie, who couldn't afford to join them at the country club. Elsie, who drove a 10-year-old Honda and lived in a studio apartment in Arlington. The Honda was real. The apartment was real. What they didn't know was that the Honda was equipped with bulletproof glass and run-flat tires, and the studio apartment was one of 7 properties I owned across 3 countries, maintained specifically because it was anonymous, untraceable, and 2 minutes from CIA headquarters. I found the whole thing darkly amusing. "You should let me set you up with Bradley's accountant," Karissa said at Mom's 60th birthday party. "He could help you budget better. Maybe you could save for a down payment." "Maybe?" I said, sipping champagne that cost more than her accountant made in a week. I'd just returned from Beirut, where I'd coordinated the extraction of a diplomat's family ahead of a bombing. I was tired, jet-lagged, and in no mood to explain that I could buy her house in cash if I wanted to. But I didn't want to. I wanted to watch her perform this elaborate fantasy where she was the successful sister and I was the charity case. It told me things about her that were useful. It kept me sharp. And, honestly, after years of managing intelligence operations where every word mattered and every silence could be lethal, there was something refreshing about a space where nothing I said mattered at all. "The problem," my mother said gently, "is that Elsie doesn't prioritize financial stability. She's too idealistic." Idealistic. Right. 2 weeks before that conversation, I'd authorized a drone strike that eliminated a terrorist cell planning attacks on 3 U.S. embassies. I'd reviewed the intelligence, confirmed the legal authorization, and given the order. 8 people died. Hundreds were saved. But sure, I was idealistic. The pattern repeated itself in 1,000 small ways. When I showed up to Thanksgiving in jeans and a Georgetown sweatshirt, Karissa was in Chanel. "I wish you'd let me take you shopping," she whispered. "I know money's tight, but you could at least try to look put together." I'd flown in from Berlin that morning on a military transport. I was carrying a diplomatic pouch containing intelligence assessments for the National Security Advisor. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. "I'll try harder," I said. When my nephew asked what I did for work, Karissa answered for me. "Aunt Elsie works in an office building. She does paperwork for the government." "Like a secretary?" he asked. "Something like that," Karissa said, smiling. I smiled back. 3 days earlier, I'd briefed the president's chief of staff on a Russian influence operation. But sure, something like a secretary. The worst part wasn't the condescension. It was that Karissa genuinely thought she was being kind. She thought her generosity, inviting me to parties I couldn't afford, offering to pay for things she assumed I needed, was altruism. She had no idea it was surveillance. Every word she said, every assumption she made told me exactly who she was. And who she was, I was beginning to realize, was jealous. Not of my job, obviously. She had no idea what my job actually was. But of something else. My independence, maybe, The fact that I didn't need her approval or her help. That I'd built a life completely separate from the family's obsession with status symbols and social climbing. She needed me to be failing so she could feel successful. I let her have it. The invitation arrived in March, a cream-colored envelope with embossed lettering. You're invited to celebrate Karissa and Bradley's new home. New home was an understatement. They'd bought an 8,000-square-foot colonial in McLean, Virginia, with 6 bedrooms, a pool, and a 3-car garage. The neighborhood was gated. The neighbors were lobbyists, defense contractors, and old money. It's our dream house, Karissa gushed over the phone. You have to come to the housewarming. I know it's far from your place, but maybe you could take the metro? I'll figure it out, I said. The party was scheduled for Saturday, April 15th, at 6 p.m. On Tuesday, April 11th, I got a call from my deputy director. We have a situation in Caracas, he said. The ambassador needs an immediate security assessment. State wants someone senior on the ground. When? Thursday. You'd be back Saturday afternoon. I looked at my calendar. Carissa's party was Saturday evening. Book it, I said. Caracas was a mess. The political situation had deteriorated faster than anyone predicted, and the embassy was vulnerable. I spent 2 days reviewing security protocols, meeting with the regional security officer, and drafting recommendations that would likely require congressional approval. By Saturday morning, I was on a government aircraft heading back to Andrews Air Force Base. We landed at 3 p.m. My security detail drove me back to my apartment in Arlington. The real one, not the one I showed my family, where I showered, changed into civilian clothes, and checked my phone. 17 messages from Karissa. Where are you? The party started an hour ago. Everyone's asking about you. Are you even coming? I texted back, on my way, sorry, work thing. My phone rang immediately. A work thing? Carissa's voice was sharp. What work thing could possibly be more important than this? Just running late, I'll be there by 7. Elsie, this is my housewarming. The housewarming for my dream house. Could you please, for once, prioritize family? I thought about the 18-hour days in Caracas, the security briefings, the ambassador's family sleeping in a safe room while I coordinated threat assessments. I'll be there by 7, I repeated. She hung up. I arrived at 7:15 p.m. in my Honda, parking between a Tesla and a Range Rover. The house was lit up like a magazine spread, all glass and white columns and manicured hedges. Through the windows, I could see people in cocktail attire holding wine glasses, laughing. I was wearing black pants and a simple blouse. Presentable, civilian. Unmemorable. I rang the doorbell. Karissa opened it, her smile tight. You made it. I made it. Everyone's in the living room. We're doing house tours. She looked me up and down. You look tired. Long week. I'm sure, she lowered her voice. Bradley's parents are here. And his boss. Please try not to mention how you can't afford things. It's embarrassing. I nodded. I'll keep it vague. Thank you. The house was exactly what I expected. Marble countertops, designer furniture, a wine fridge that probably cost more than most people's cars. Karissa was in her element, leading groups through rooms, pointing out features. Italian tile in the bathrooms. Heated floors in the master suite. Custom cabinetry throughout. I stood near the window, holding a glass of wine someone had handed me, half listening. Elsie! My mother appeared at my elbow. There you are. Come meet Bradley's parents properly. She introduced me to Roger and Patricia Whitten, silver-haired, country club sophisticated, the kind of people who measured worth in property values and club memberships. Elsie works for the government, my mother said, in the same tone she might say, Elsie volunteers at the animal shelter. How nice, Patricia said. What department? I'm with an agency in Virginia, I said vaguely. Oh? Her interest evaporated. Well, that's stable. Stable. The word hung in the air like a participation trophy. Karissa appeared with another couple. These are the Harrisons. They live 3 doors down. Mansion on the corner, the one with the circular driveway. The Harrisons smiled politely. The wife, Madison, asked, Do you live nearby, Elsie? Arlington, I said. Oh, Arlington's nice. Which neighborhood? Here it was. The moment where I could mention the condo I owned in Clarendon, the brownstone in Georgetown I'd inherited from my grandfather, the properties I maintained for operational purposes. Instead, I said, I rent a studio near the metro. The slight pause, the careful smile. Well, that's practical. Karissa laughed, a little too loud. Elsie's always been practical. She's very good at making do with less. My mother added, she's been in the same apartment for years. I keep telling her she should buy something, build equity, but… She trailed off with a helpless shrug. Real estate's expensive, I said mildly. It is, Madison agreed sympathetically, but you know, if you ever want recommendations for financial advisors, my brother works with first-time home buyers. He could probably help you qualify for something. That's kind of you. Karissa was beaming. This was her party, her house, her moment, to be the successful sister surrounded by successful people. And here I was, playing my role perfectly, the charity case, the cautionary tale, the one who'd never quite figured it out. I sipped my wine and watched her glow. Around 8:30, most guests had completed the house tour and migrated back to the living room. Karissa stood by the fireplace, Bradley at her side, holding court. Someone asked about square footage. Someone else asked about the mortgage rate they'd locked in. A man I didn't recognize, one of Bradley's colleagues, asked where everyone else lived. The Harrisons mentioned their mansion. Another couple mentioned their place in Potomac. Patricia Whitten mentioned their weekend home in Rehoboth Beach. Then someone, I think it was Madison Harrison, turned to me. Where did you say you lived, Elsie? The room didn't exactly go quiet, but there was a shift, a subtle attention. I could have deflected, changed the subject, made a joke. Instead, I said, Arlington. I rent a studio. My mother's voice, quiet but audible. Still renting. A studio, I think. Karissa, seizing the moment, her voice bright with performative sympathy. One of those buildings with the coin laundry in the basement, for the poor in general. Laughter. Uncomfortable but real, the kind of laughter that happens when someone says something mean that's also funny, and everyone's relieved it wasn't said about them. Bradley's boss chuckled. Patricia Whitten covered her smile with her wine glass. Madison Harrison's eyes widened, half shocked, half amused. My mother looked at her shoes. Karissa was still smiling, that bright, brittle smile that meant she'd landed the joke she wanted. She'd positioned herself exactly where she needed to be, successful, generous, tolerant of her struggling sister. I smiled too, because in that moment I knew something she didn't. I knew that parked 2 blocks away, a motorcade was waiting. I knew that my security detail had been tracking my location since I left the base. And I knew that in about 30 seconds, they were going to realize I'd been stationary at a residential address for over an hour, which triggered protocol. The laughter was still echoing when I heard it, the low rumble of heavy vehicles. Through the front windows, headlights appeared, multiple vehicles, moving in formation. A black SUV pulled up directly in front of the house, then another, then a third. The laughter died. Everyone turned toward the window. Doors opened, men in dark suits emerged, professional, precise, unmistakable. Security detail. The kind you see on the news accompanying diplomats and high-level officials. Karissa's face went white. What's… The doorbell rang. No one moved. It rang again. Bradley, looking confused and slightly panicked, opened the door. 2 men stood there, earpieces, suits. The lead agent scanned the room, his eyes landing on me. Madam, he said, his voice calm and formal, the motorcade is ready. The silence was absolute. Every eye in the room turned to me. I set down my wine glass with careful precision. Thank you, Agent Morrison. I'll just be a moment. Of course, ma'am, we'll wait outside. They withdrew. The door closed. The silence stretched. Karissa's voice came out, strangled. Elsie? I turned to her. I'm sorry, I have to go. There's a situation that requires my attention. A situation? She looked like she'd been slapped. What situation? Who are those people? Security detail, I said simply. Security detail for what? I could have explained. Could have laid it all out. The title, the clearance level, the 20 years of service. Could have told her about Caracas, about Beirut, about the 15 countries where I'd coordinated operations she'd never hear about on the news. Instead, I smiled, the same smile I'd been giving her for 2 decades. For work. My mother found her voice. Elsie, what's going on? I really do have to go, Mom. Karissa, thank you for having me. The house is beautiful. I walked toward the door, the crowd parted like water. Bradley's boss, the man who'd chuckled at the laundry joke, was staring at me with something like recognition dawning. Wait, Beckwith. Elsie Beckwith. Your DDO. Deputy Director for Operations. I paused at the door, hand on the knob. Have a good evening, everyone. I walked out. The motorcade was arranged in standard formation: lead vehicle, my SUV, trail vehicle. Agent Morrison opened the rear door of the center vehicle. Before I climbed in, I glanced back at the house. Every face was pressed against the windows, frozen, staring. Karissa stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame like she might fall without it. Her face was chalk white, her mouth open. My mother stood behind her, both hands over her mouth. Bradley looked like he was trying to solve an equation he didn't have the numbers for. And Patricia Whitten, the woman who'd called my career stable, had dropped her wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white marble entryway like blood. I climbed into the SUV. Agent Morrison closed the door. Langley, ma'am? He asked. Langley? I confirmed. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. They were still standing there, frozen in the windows of the mansion. The house that was supposed to prove Carissa's success. The party that was supposed to celebrate her arrival. And I thought about the coin laundry joke, about 23 years of condescension and pity, about the studio apartment they thought defined my failure. That studio apartment was worth $1.2 million. I owned it outright. I also owned a 3-bedroom condo in Clarendon, a brownstone in Georgetown, and a villa in Lisbon that I'd purchased for operational reasons but kept because I liked the view. My personal net worth, including investments in property, was somewhere north of $8 million. But more than that, more than the money, more than the property, I had something Karissa would never understand. I had purpose. I had power. I had a job that mattered. And for 23 years, I'd let her think I had nothing, because it was easier than explaining, funnier than correcting, and more useful than she could possibly imagine. The motorcade turned onto the highway, heading toward Langley. My phone buzzed. A message from my deputy director: crisis in Caracas escalating. Need your assessment for NSC briefing tomorrow, 0800. I typed back, on my way. I'll have it ready. Another buzz. This time, Karissa, what the fuck just happened? I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed, I had to go to work. Thanks again for the party. The house is beautiful, really. I didn't add, and by the way, I could buy it 3 times over. I didn't need to. The motorcade said it all. I never heard directly from Karissa about that night, but my mother called 3 days later, her voice small and careful. Elsie, honey, I need to ask you something. Okay. What exactly do you do for work? I was in my office at Langley, reviewing intelligence reports from 6 different embassies. I work for the CIA, Mom. I'm the deputy director for operations. A long silence. Then, for how long? 23 years. 23 years, she repeated, and you never told us. I told you I worked for the government. In Virginia, I was never dishonest. Quote, but you let us think. I let you think what you wanted to think, I said gently, what was easier for everyone. Karissa she's very upset. I'm sure she is. She said you humiliated her, in front of everyone. The motorcade, the security, everyone's talking about it. I thought about the coin laundry joke, about the laughter, about 23 years of being treated like I was too incompetent to manage my own life. I didn't humiliate her, I said. I just left a party when I was needed at work. With a motorcade. That's standard protocol for my position. Another silence. Are you angry with us? The question surprised me. No. Karissa thinks you did it on purpose, to embarrass her. Karissa thinks everything is about her, I said. This was about me doing my job. She's having a hard time with this. I imagine she is. My mother's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Were we really that awful? To you? I could have said yes. Could have listed every condescending comment, every pitying look, every assumption that I was failing because my success didn't look like theirs. Instead, I said, you saw what you expected to see. We all do that. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry, Elsie. I had no idea. I know. Can you forgive us? I looked out my office window at the Langley compound, the buildings where I'd spent 2 decades serving my country, the place where my work actually mattered. There's nothing to forgive, I said. You didn't know because I didn't tell you. That was my choice. Why didn't you? I thought about that. About operational security, about the convenience of being underestimated, about how easy it had been to just let them believe their own story. Because, I said finally, it was easier than explaining, and because, honestly, I didn't need you to know. I knew. That was enough. After I hung up, I sat for a moment in the quiet of my office. I thought about Carissa's face in the doorway, about the dropped wine glass, about the way Bradley's boss had whispered my title, like he was solving a puzzle he should have figured out years ago. And I realized something. I'd spent 23 years letting them think I was poor, struggling, barely making it, not because I was hiding, not because I was ashamed, but because their opinion of me had never mattered enough to correct. The people who needed to know what I did, the president, the Joint Chiefs, the intelligence community, they knew. Everyone else was just noise. I turned back to my computer and opened the Caracas assessment file. There was work to do. And that, in the end, was all.